This
switching for people?
conference will now be recorded.
Oh, okay. All right. I think everyone's still there. All right, cool. So I'm going to talk about, first of all, the Institute for Marine Research, which is where I work. Then I'm going to talk about this is a completely made up term, but what I call marine research divers, and then the opportunities in all of these different sectors that there are for people who are marine research divers, and how you can find your path in this little bubble of a career. Cool. So let's dive into it. So the Institute for Marine Research, long story short, is an NGO that me and my partner Chelsea started here in the Philippines not too long ago. We're only about 2 years old, and we did it with the with the aim of doing as fine scale, which is to say like the fanciest kind of most techie research that we could on local ecosystems and how we could integrate that science to educate and transform the local area that we live in, which is the municipality of Darwin. Uh, so what we do is we use marine research divers, which is kind of like what this whole thing is leading into, to gather data, and then once we gather that data, we then use it to try to influence the community into a more sustainable outlook. Basically, is what we try to do, and we do that by publishing reports, which, if any of you guys are interested, we just published one online a few days ago. You can find that on our website. We also determine areas of concern with regards to unsustainable practices. So stuff like negative fishing practices, or it could even be areas of concern that are natural areas of concern, like crown of thorns outbreaks, things like that. We identify them as quickly as possible, and then we enact things to mitigate those effects. With the whole point being to protect the social and economic security of Darwin's coastal communities. We also want to publish our work in the future, so it's not just us who gets to see all this cool data. Anyway, what I talk about when I say that we use marine research divers? Well, I describe a marine research diver as a diver with knowledge and experience in diverse methods of data collection. That is to say, getting data from dives. This can be done in a very, very wide variety of ways, from just going down with a slate and pencil to more sophisticated ways like using fish lasers and 3D modeling software and the kind of stuff that we do here at the Institute. But there's a whole array of different ways to gather this data. So a diver who is a marine research diver can fulfill a large variety of roles based around science and diving. And while opportunities can vary, obviously, the more advanced of a diver you are, the more doors are open to you, and vice versa, the more of a background knowledge you have in marine science, same thing, the more doors could be open to you. But one thing to keep in mind is that this doesn't mean that you have to be a marine biologist who's had a full career, so to speak. You don't have to have had the whole 4-year degree or 5-year degree, depending on what country you're in order to be able to have some of these opportunities. It could just be that you're very passionate about diving. So the truth is there is a very big world out there when it comes to diving and science put together. Normally, you have to at least have a PADI certification for this opportunity, so just to prove that you are a safe diver. Not only PADI, but of course, as B will tell you, that is kind of like the most world-renowned and most take your word for it kind of certification that most people recognize around, especially when it comes to hiring people. So that's why I say that. But a passion for the ocean can sometimes be all you need to get started in this field. As a diver, you're already closer and you're already more knowledgeable than most when it comes to the marine world, mostly because you see it with your own eyes, and that is not something that a lot of people get to do. So as a diver, you tend to be more in touch with the health and the feel of the ocean than even some scientists. So that means that you can have more a finger on the pulse. So the last thing, of course, is that when you do get into this field, which I have worked in my entire adult life, I can tell you it is very, very rewarding because not only do you get the pleasure of diving and you get the pleasure of working in diving, but you get the pleasure of feeling like you are contributing to a larger cause and you're helping to save the world that you so enjoy underwater. So let's talk about number one opportunity. Opportunity number one is working in NGOs. Now, this tends to be sometimes what is seen as the only visible opportunity for a lot of people. It's the most in your face if you guys are looking on whether it's PADI jobs or you're looking on other employment websites. Normally, when you look at marine science and diving, NGOs is the first thing to pop up. Now, NGOs are very important. They can provide vital services when otherwise there aren't enough resources, which is always because there can never be too many resources when it comes to saving the ocean. Now, many NGOs study specifically underwater ecosystems, whether these be coral reefs or seagrass or another huge myriad of stuff, which means you need divers to collect the data, such is the case in our institute. Now, if you already start with the notion that you need divers to collect your data, that means that being a diver tends to be a minimum in order to be part of these organizations. Now, the cool thing about these guys is that normally, as kind of like, because NGOs, it's the eternal struggle of trying to get as much funding as possible, sometimes they use dive courses as a source of funding, which means if you become a dive instructor, you have a big foothold to be able to get a job in this industry. It's very passionate, very rewarding work, and it means you're spending a lot of time underwater. So it's not a part-time job, it's normally full-time job. Now, you get to live, if you work in the NGO sector, as I'm sure if anyone here has worked in it before can tell you, you tend to be able to live in pretty amazing places. For example, I'm currently living in Downwind, which is a hell of an amazing place. But there's also all kinds of NGOs, marine-based NGOs, all over the Caribbean, all over everything from Polynesia to the Great Barrier Reef to the Red Sea, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Wherever you have thriving coral reefs, it's very likely that you'll find NGOs trying to save them, and you'll find these NGOs hire dive instructors as a way of bumping up their work. Because they kind of live in coral reef areas, it tends to be very remote and basic living. So most people who get into this field get in it for the rewarding and passionate aspect of the work. It's not really a massive paycheck, but if you pick the right companies, making sure that you stay away from those that seek to exploit you, you will be able to live a rewarding life from this kind of opportunities. Another good thing about these guys is that they tend to be very open to accepting new instructors. So unlike some other aspects of the dive world, these guys don't expect you to have 10,000 dives or to, as an instructor, have hundreds of certifications or be a platinum level instructor or anything like that. They'll normally accept new instructors just because they also need you to have that knowledge of the marine world, which you can learn through all kinds of different methods. So that's a really cool thing about the NGO world is that you can come in as an outsider and then get really deep into it. Cool. Blabbed on for a little too long there. I apologize. Moving on. Oh, went too far. Okay. Next, research institutes. So this is something that people normally don't look at if you're a diver and looking for a job, which is why I think this presentation will kind of open your minds a little bit into like the world that you can actually access as a new dive instructor or a new dive professional. Research institutes can be private, they can be public. The thing is that they normally are aligned with a government or a university. Now, research institutes, they sound like a scary place to go looking for a job if you're not a marine biologist. But this shouldn't actually dissuade you. Why? Because there's a lot of times where these marine biologists require experienced divers to carry out or help them out with their research. A great example is the Great Barrier Reef research stations like Heron Island or Lizard Island. These guys regularly hire just dive masters and instructors to be able to handle the long hours that they have to spend doing experiments underwater. So that's really cool. It's an area that people don't usually look at in the marine, in the dive instructor, dive professional job market, but there is always a need for divers there. And obviously, in my opinion, the best part is that you could be involved in groundbreaking research along the way. Yeah. All right. Next up, you have resorts. So as the diving world gets more and more kind of informed about the oceans and the troubles that the oceans are facing, then you're finding that there's divers who now kind of ask constantly that their dive centers have someone who can inform them of that what they're seeing underwater. They don't want just to see pretty colors anymore. The dive world is changing quickly towards a more conservation-based environment. So with more focus being put on these challenges, a lot of resorts all over the world are hiring specifically marine biologists or people who are very knowledgeable in the marine world. So if you become a marine research diver, you can help resorts identify possible changes, therefore making their resorts more profitable by making them less likely to be characterized as non-eco-friendly. And sometimes, depending on which resorts you're talking about, you can even get involved in community research projects like coral nurseries or ID projects, which you, again, don't need a big fat degree to be part of, though it does help. Guests can take a part in these projects and feel like they're helping, as well as contributing to data banks worldwide, which is really, really cool. So resorts are another way, another kind of avenue that you can take after you've done your IDC with IDP, if you wish to do that, which you should totally do if you haven't yet. All right. Anyway, moving on. Government work. So government work is, I would say, among the most overlooked of potential job markets for new dive professionals and marine biologists, mostly because there is this kind of myth that you need to be from a certain country in order to work for that country's government. Normally, all a government will ask you to is to be able to work in that country. So, in other words, to have the ability to go over there, get a visa, and work, and to be able to get there by yourself. If you can do both of those things and you're and you're qualified enough, then you can actually get work at the government agency of any foreign country. Oh, speaking the language, another huge one. As long as you speak the language. Um, so these jobs can be extremely rewarding because you really feel like you're helping that country out, and it usually is kind of like a gig thing where you get hired for one job and then you bounce over to the next one because they're always looking for people who've had past experience within that same government kind of project. I've done this as well. I've done this in Peru, and I can tell you it's a very fun and very exciting type of work. Um, so another interesting thing when it comes to this type of work is that governments really like when you have a very diverse background. So if you didn't start off your world as being a marine biologist dive instructor, you could be, let's say, just throwing out a photographer, but you've gotten into the scientific diving world, they'll still be interested in you because they love that whole international connectivity of everything that you can learn from each other. And finally, big business. So because of all the dangers going into the coral reef ecosystems nowadays, big business has had a huge amount of pressure to be more eco-friendly, rightfully so. And what big businesses are doing a lot now is hiring people who are scientific divers in order to conduct research for themselves and make sure that they're not going to get caught out by hurting the marine environment. First thing about working for big business, it tends to be extremely lucrative. They pay very, very well. Among the top clients of this, you have giant building agencies. So if anyone's building for, like the little example here, if anyone's building a giant wind farm in the middle of the ocean, they're going to require marine researchers to come in and take a look. And if you have anything from big bridge projects, any kind of big architecture, you also have big oil, big gas, all of these industries, which I know for many people they seem like, oh, why would we ever go work for the enemy? Well, it's kind of to make them less the enemy. It's not a path for everyone. It is very much working for a giant multinational corporation, but they can have very lucrative opportunities with very nice contracts, and you can help whatever project this is become more sustainable over time, which would be great. These guys, out of all of the ones that I've mentioned before, the going into work for big business is probably the one where you would need the most certifications. In other words, it's the one where you're least likely to get in there if you don't have some kind of degree, and you're not at least a dive instructor, if not maybe even further into tech or into commercial diving. Um, it's kind of one of the harder ones to get into, mostly because of all the competitiveness, because of the very lucrative jobs. Finally, let's talk about how you find all of these jobs. It can be very daunting to start a career in as a marine research diver, mostly because there's no one place to find all of these things. Um, a lot of it tends to be groundwork. A lot of it is going in and finding a company or an NGO or a country even that you really want to work in, and then digging in and going deep into the web to try to find the jobs, because a lot of jobs for a lot of different sectors don't appear on the same websites. For a lot of them, if I had to pick a site that had the most kind of information on this kind of stuff, it would probably be Wise Oceans. They have a very detailed section, and one thing that they tend to be very good at is separating um, what is volunteering jobs. In other words, when you don't get paid or you have to pay to work for a certain place, from actual good paid jobs. So that's important to not get caught up in that kind of thing. Conservation careers is also a good one. There's a lot of worldwide NGOs which always are hiring new instructors. Great examples of this are Operation Wallacea and Coral Cay Conservation, as well as Broadreach. These guys are a great place to kind of dip your toe in, not as a long-term career, but more as a, hey, I want to check out how working in an NGO field could be like. That's a good place to start. And of course, for resorts and stuff, you have more the PADI Pro's website, which has hundreds of posts a day on different jobs that are opening up around the world. And then for more kind of businessy stuff, a great place to look would be the Pacific Marine Group in Australia. So just like little places where you can find your stuff. Before you start looking at any of these types of jobs, one key thing to do is to look and know what it is you're actually aiming for. You have to have that clear path, because I have met many marine research diver who have come into this field without a clear idea. They never really sat themselves down, and they just went from 3 months gig to 3 months gig, jumping around without a clear path of what they're trying to accomplish. And that can waste a lot of your time and your passion, which you don't really want to do. So it's important to sit yourself in the mirror and be like, all right, if I'm taking this marine research diver route, what is the ultimate goal here? What do I want to end up doing in the future? And if the answer is I don't know, then again, dipping your toe in here and there can be the answer to that. Yeah, if you love the oceans and you see yourself fighting for the oceans and you want to make a career out of it, I hope this short little presentation helped you out in possibly finding a way to do that. Cool, and that's it for me, and thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Raf. That's really awesome. Does anyone have any questions for Raf? see there's one question in
Yeah.
the chat.
Do you mind if I'll just read it out so the
Please,
rest
yeah,
of.
go ahead.
All right. It says, I'm a PhD student. I'll defend in a few months. That's awesome. I'm working on the bird behavior now. My background is evolutionary biology and animal behavior. I'm also a diver, rescue certification. And after the PhD, I want to go in the direction of marine biology and able to mix diving and science. Oh, yay. Exactly what this presentation was about. Awesome. Planning on getting my diver and instructor. Awesome. If you can, do it at IDP. It's a great place. But also thinking about scientific diving certification. Maybe an internship, volunteering. Cool. What would be your advice? All right. So, kind of going back to the final slide, the advice would really be to know what the path is, because use marine biology mixed with diving, that's awesome. But you really got to sit down and ask yourself, am I wanting to work for an NGO, knowing what kind of lifestyle that entails? Do I want to work for a big business, et cetera, et cetera? Because if you know that you want to end up working for hospitality, resorts, for that might be where you want to aim rather than starting out in NGOs and starting out volunteering your time and paying to do stuff there when you know you're going to end up in hospitality. So it's really about the first step is picking what you want your career to look like as it develops, so you don't end up taking dead ends. I hope that answered at least part of your question, Clementine.
Thank you very much, Raf, for that answer. Absolutely. Clementine, feel free as well to leave your email address with us so we can send you a bit more information about getting your dive master and instructor level, for example, through IMR. Because IMR and IDP, so Institute for Marine Research and Instructor Development Philippines, we work together. So we have some great programs that we could offer as well. So feel free to leave your email address and get back to you with more information if that is indeed the path that you'd like to take. Yeah, but I hope at least this presentation has been very helpful for you guys. It definitely has opened up my eyes in terms of possibilities that are out there. I had no idea about the big businesses really. So thank you very much, Rab. And what we will do is we're going to move on. If no one else has any questions, we're going to move on to Anne. Let's see, there's one more chat. All right. Thank you very much, Clementine. We found your message. So we'll get back to you soon. So
yeah, and if anyone,
sorry,
I'll just interrupt. And if anyone has any further questions for me, feel free to contact me through. I'm sure I'll just drop my email in the message here.
Cool. Thank you very much. I'm just switching slides for one moment. All right. I think we're back up and running. Raf, I'm going to mute you. If you have anything else, just send me a message and I'll unmute you.
Okay. Bye, everybody. Thank you so much for listening.
Bye, Raf. Thank you.
All right, Anne, I'm going to mute myself and then I'll hand over the reins to you. I do see a few more things. All right, there you go. I was just checking the chat box, but we're good. All right, I am going to get muted and then have fun on the presentation. I see that Oscar has joined. Thanks for turning on your video, Oscar. It's really nice to see you.
At least we're seeing somebody.
Exactly. That's awesome. I love it. All right. Cool. All right. There you go, guys.
Is it? Can I? Right. Okay, so good evening, guys. So first, I'd like to thank IDP and, of course, B for the invite. It's my pleasure to be back in the community of where I first started as an instructor. So my topic tonight is how to become a paid pirate. So basically, this is like taking over both as a dive career, as your dive career of choice. But also getting paid to do that. So that's me on my beautiful boat in Indonesia. And our talk today would sorry, where did I do that? So our talk today would just be the flow of the talk today is just going to give you an overview of the liveaboard classifications that we have worldwide, as well as what sort of jobs that you can have as a dive professional. And of course, what are the advantages and disadvantages of establishing a dive career, if that is meant to be for you or not. And then if you've decided to want to have a go at it, I'd show you or discuss with you like essential attributes that you would want to have or start developing before your first application. Okay, so I'll just give you a short overview of who I am. So welcome aboard. I'm a PADI instructor as well. I finished my IDC in IDP, and currently I'm the cruise director of Aegis Siren, which is equivalent or the same company as the Philippine Siren in the Philippines. I'm sure you've seen it in Darwin as well. And I've also been working full-time on liveaboards and I've been very fortunate to be working as cruise director elsewhere in the world, and I'm from the Philippines, okay? I'm from Iloilo, actually, which is non-scuba diving place. So I'll move on to the general classification of liveaboards, in which you can all work as a dive professional, be it a dive master or an instructor. Okay, so first and foremost, you have super yachts here. So these are the big yachts, the flashy yachts that are maybe 120 feet or so bigger than that you'd often find in Subic or maybe in Palau, which is like the hub for refueling of super yachts. And it's quite rare because they have a very small niche as a dive professional to actually enter in that market. And these are mostly all private owned boats. So they only operate in the sense that they are either chartered if the owner tries to rent it out as a charter, or it's the owners themselves. So most of the crew that are on these boats normally have 2 or 3 more certifications other than just being a dive instructor or a dive professional. So they'd either be doubling as an engineer or a deckhand or something else, because the crewing on these boats are quite difficult because they travel all over the world. So they're very, very picky on what they want to get for this super yacht. So if you know anybody who's in that business, it's best to keep your networks with them open, or communications with them open. You never know. They're usually very, very high paying, but also it's not as stable as a Safari liveaboard. So I've put an arrow on Safari liveaboards because that's mainly where most dive professionals would want to work in, and these are trips that go around. These boats have cabins, can be as short as 24 meters, all the way to about 60 meters. But usually these boats have cabins where guests can sleep in for 2 nights or a maximum of maybe 21 nights, 21 night trips. Okay, so the longest trip I've done is 14-night trip, and that also included some resupplying from nearby, towns or cities or so, which are arranged prior to the trip. But these are all what we would classify as safari liveaboards. Okay, so we also have day boats in which they have day trips, and some can even have more than just 12-hour trips, and they come back at night. I'm sure if, some of you may have gone to the Red Sea and you have these bigger boats, not like the ones that we have in the Philippines, for example, or that go to Apo, where there are a lot of boats like what you'd have in Atmosphere. I think Liquid is the same as well, that you have a bit of a lounge area. But like the day boats, the massive ones, they don't have sleeping cabins, but they have lounge areas that people can relax, and even the divers and non-divers actually go on trips, and they also go to remote places. So all these 3 boats can have opportunities for dive professionals in general. Okay, so moving on to what sort of job you can have as a dive professional. If you're pursuing this type of dive career, what sort of job you can have on a liveaboard. Okay, so there's mainly just 2, and one is a dive guide, okay, and the other is a cruise director, or you're managing the boat. So for a dive guide, to be honest with you, it is advantageous that you have a dive master or an instructor level. However, it is still not. It depends on which country you're in, because like in Indonesia, for example, we have hired 2 of the guides that we have on board are all just rescue divers. So it depends on what the minimum requirement is. But of course, there are other attributes to what the other skills that they have that has made them much more preferred in that sense, like maybe the number of dives or the familiarity of an entire area or entire region or in the country, which we have prioritized them over instructors. So as a dive guide, you're not just going to be confined into guiding. So when you're working on a boat, it's like a small family, okay? But at the same time, everybody's living together. So everything is shared, and you're not, even as a part of a dive team, you're just not going to be limited to diving because everybody has rules in terms of, emergency protocols and things like that. So even just as a dive guide there, on top of your 4 dives a day, which is 3 dives a day at minimum that you'd have on board, you'd have to do night watch duties. It's basically like just staying up all night and just looking at the water, making sure that the anchors don't move, or the mooring blocks are not moved, or the sails are still up, or the mast is still up, and things like that. And also you may be required to do land tours, which is also a very exciting job, to be honest. So mostly on safari trips, we go on land at least once, because being on a boat for 10 days can be too much for a guest. So we go climb mountains and all these things, and go on hikes or beach parties and things like that. Depends on which kind of boat, or the luxury of the boat that you're in as well. You may have housekeeping jobs. So there are a few boats. There's always a minimum number of crew that is required depending on the size of the boat. So the smaller the boat, the more the more things you're likely to do. Okay, on top of your diving. Okay, so some may have housekeeping jobs, but again, because there's less crew, you'd have more tips. Okay, so you may also be involved in boat maintenance when the boat goes back on dock. So it's also requiring you to maybe polish something. So pretty much like everybody in a boat or in a liveaboard is not, even the cruise director, it's not just confined to what his job description should be, because the faster things are done, the more everybody's easily able to rest. Okay. Another job that you could have on board as a dive professional is a cruise director or a boat manager. So basically this is like just running a resort, but it's just in the water. Okay, but it's basically just running everything, the operations on the boat, making sure that before you get on the boat, you have everything that you need for the next 10 days, having to be in charge of the itinerary as well, everything, pretty much inventories, sales, just pretty much everything, and overseeing a lot of things. Of course, this may sound as a very daunting task, but you have an entire crew as well to delegate things to. Okay, so do not be worried about that. Okay, next. Right, so if you're considering a job, of course, to work on liveaboards, most instructors that I know or dive professionals always want to try out life at sea. Of course, I wouldn't say and try and discourage everybody, because I think it's what I do and I love it. But again, of course, as with any job as a dive professional, be it on land or elsewhere or in marine research or so, there's always pros and cons into it. Okay, so first I'll go through the positives of the job. Okay, so sorry. So the positives of the job, obviously, for obvious reasons, because you're on a dive boat. The reason why guests would want to go on the liveaboard is you want to dive more remote places. Okay, so the more far-flung places, and also cuts down the time that you can get from one spot to another. We all know this, but again, because of that, you have that luxury. You're able to dive literally anywhere where you'd like. Okay, of course, given calculating all the other factors such as currents and stuff like this, but you are able to dive and be in the spot and not have to wait the right time to get in or drop in a site where it's the best time to dive in a low tide, for example, or high tide or changing tide. So you have the advantage of doing that, and you can you get to experience the best of a dive site or a place or an area. So that spells amazing diving for us. And of course, as a dive professional, you'd be racking up a lot of dives, but as well as you'd see really the best and the worst of a place at a specific time, and you get a lot of experience out of it on your own without having anybody to tell you, because you dive in these places too many times. Okay, so you're also much more able to do exploratory dives because you're already on the site. So there are a lot of times where things just go wrong, and then but you just decide like you can just go and drop there because it looks nice from the drone, for example, or so. Also, another thing in liveaboards is that you have a more expanded network, so you develop a network. Your connections much more it's extended, because most of the dive companies or the dive resorts around the world are the only ones that are able to charter trips that are liveaboards, basically liveaboards, and you get to know the owners of dive centers around the world. So this connection, you're able to showcase your skills if you're good at it or so, and these are trips that they will remember for the rest of their lives. And it is also financially rewarding because obviously when you're on a boat, you get, other than just the tips and your salary, of course, you don't get to spend on anything. So you won't even get signal for most of the week, and you won't be spending on anything. There's food is for free, accommodation is for free. So you only will be spending money once you get on land, which is like once every 10 days or so. So you'll also be doing a lot of traveling. Of course, there's hot spots that you would get on just every week. Sorry, get on every week, and you're climbing on viewpoints and things like that, and try to pretend that it's the best thing you've ever seen when you've seen it 500 times. But yeah, you'd still have to do that. But that's the best part of it, because you get to see much of the world as well, not just underwater. So whatever, wherever you are in the world, or wherever you're assigned, you get to visit land, those places as well. So you also get to learn a whole lot depending on how you look at it. For me personally, my perseverance has been extended, and yeah, it's just exponentially, it's just crazy. You also get a lot of more accidents. Okay, you get exposure to emergencies and how to handle them, because in liveaboard diving is where I think you'd have more dive emergencies than there are on resorts or on land, because pretty much when the guests pay for a trip, they're paying for a trip that for all the dives. So every time a diver actually misses on one dive, it's like they're losing money. So most of the time they get this pressure that they have to get the value for their money. So this is when dive emergencies, usually they're very tired, they're already saturated in things, but they still push it because they want to get value for their money. So most I've had a couple of evacuations and things like this. So it gets to just your skills on emergencies gets very sharp. You also get to see, because you're going to be you'll be dealing with 16 people or 20 people all together in one small boat. You get to have like deal with different cultures. So a lot of them there can be culture clashes and things like this, and personalities as well. But it also just teaches you a whole lot more in terms of customer service, because not to say that you'd stereotype them, but pretty much you'd know what to expect of them and how to the best service that you can give them in response. Okay, so that's pretty much for the cons. For the pros rather. For the cons, of course, as a dive professional or an instructor rather, there's less teaching opportunity. So for teaching, maybe the best that you get, we don't obviously do open water courses. You expect people to come on board. They're all hardcore divers, ready to dive 3 or 4 times a day for a whole week. And sorry, where were we? Hello, sorry. Sorry. Okay, so That was quite slow. Okay, so you'd probably get nitrox or advanced. Okay, as most of the specialties you'd also get would be, it's mostly just nitrox, advanced, and deep dive specialties. We don't do rescue. We don't do, maybe in the Red Sea you can do rescue, but it's just difficult because it needs a lot of planning as well, where you'd want to go, what kind of dive site you have to be anchored in just to perform these things. And you're also going to be just you'd have to think about the rest of the guests that are on board with you. Okay, so another thing that is, I think, a major thing is you have less personal time or personal space. So you're going to be in a boat stuck with 10 people who you will never meet maybe for the rest of your life. And then you have crew there as well. And you will barely, there's no such thing as a social distancing on a boat, which is quite tricky now. But yeah, you will never have personal time. So it depends on how you would deal with it. Like I wake up at 4:30 in the morning just so to make sure that I can have coffee alone. But at 4:30 there is already one crew cleaning the glasses there, some stuff on the boat already. So it's quite difficult, and you'll actually start feeling that you'll need personal space. Okay, so you also have your cabins for sure, but it's understandable, especially for people who, for the crew, like if you're part of the crew, this is a normal life for you. So you won't feel that after maybe about a month at sea working full time on a boat. Compared to resorts, for sure, it is so much more demanding, and it's also very fast paced. You don't know which day it is anymore. You don't know because you don't get signal as well. You just keep diving, and it's just really exhausting as well. You have multiple jobs on board as well, like I mentioned earlier. Okay, so if you think you're able to do that, and of course you don't feel seasick, you can always have medicines for that. I would always recommend instructors, new or old, to always try and try boats because it's very, very rewarding. It's intense, but it's a lot of really good diving, and just if you really love diving, you will just forget about the rest of it. And meeting people and being sociable is that part as well. So I've listed down a few attributes for to establish your dive career. It doesn't necessarily mean that you'd have to have all of them, because most of them also you can develop while you're on board. Okay, that is a photo of one of our deckhands who's also a dinghy driver in Indonesia. Okay, so first I've written down multitasking ninja. So I've previously discussed also like what other jobs you'd have on board. Um, what's essential on board is that you're also able to you have very good decision making skills, and you're able to be proactive in things. Okay, so mostly it's like safety things, first aid, machinery. Once you see something is wrong, you never wait until the right person is there, or it's not your job and things like this. Because if you're on a boat and something happens and you don't report it, everybody suffers because you can never get off the boat. Okay, you're also going to be an entertainer at the same time you're a dive guide. You're also maybe serving food or like having dinner with these guys and so on and so forth. It's just much more intense, rather than maybe you're in a land setting. So it would require you that you deal well with multitasking, so you can have several jobs all at the same time, doing accounting, or maybe somebody just interrupts you in the middle of you resting and wants to buy a shirt, so things like this. Okay, so second one, most importantly, is also attitude. Okay, so attitude is very important when you're on the boat. You're quite, it's give it should be quite balanced. Okay, so you'd have a very balanced personality, because if you were upset with somebody, be it crew or guest, you can't just step off a boat for 10 more days. So if you have a fight with somebody, you'd have to deal with that, because that's just it. There's no way you can get off the boat. In the same way, if you were sick on day one, you shouldn't be on the boat anymore, because you're just going to be a liability for everybody on the boat. So another thing is, of course, your anger management skills should be very good. yeah, like I mentioned earlier, there's no such thing as social distancing. So you always have to keep the space until you probably get in your cabin. But yeah, what can you do? So diplomacy is a must because you'd have to say the right words, and people can, if you start off a trip on a bad note, it's very, very difficult, and these are trips that people prepare for years or months, and it makes a very good impression. It makes a very good impression for them if you're able to um, make them happy as well. Okay, so another thing is, of course, exemplary dive knowledge and skills. Okay, so although most of the guests that come on board are already experienced divers, there are still a lot of them who still lie about the number of dives. So, like in Tubata, for example, the requirement is 50. Okay, same as in Palau, same as in Maldives. I think it's like 70. But then people, especially if you have Chinese or Asian guests, not to discriminate, but maybe they don't understand English or so, and they just tend to declare some stuff that are, that's just not right. So if you were an instructor or a seasoned guide as well, it could really be an advantage for you because you'd have to correct them. I mean, it's part of your job too. It helps also if you have more specialties to teach. They're always going to be on a commission basis if you're teaching on top of what you're getting paid for. It also helps that you have good equipment servicing skills. If you're certified to do that, that would be brilliant because obviously you can get off a boat again. You're gonna score or have points with a guest who you fixed his inflator or something like that. It would also be good to have compressor knowledge or tech knowledge. Okay, so you don't have to be tech certified to help out, but some of the guests who come on board, or depending on which boat you have or what kind of boat you have catered to. Tech guests would usually have rebreathers or so. It's just having to, be familiar with the lingo of tech divers or what they need or so on and so forth. Okay, so that helps as well. So number 4 would be connections. Okay, so most of the dive jobs on board are not really advertised on PADI sites or elsewhere. So it's usually by word of mouth. And the reason for that is it's because it's much more intense. You'd want somebody sane enough. We always want to work with people who are sane enough, who we know would last on a boat without, with like, which is number 2 really. Attitude, which has good attitude, and you'd have to live with this person, not just have to work with this person. So it's usually just really finding the good network of people if you want to get on a boat. And another here that I've put on is speaking the language. So it also helps if you're multilingual. However, if your only language is English, at least you just have to be open into learning a new language. And it's surprising, really, that you can actually learn a language if you've stayed in a country, even no matter how old you are. Um, and it's just brilliant because this adds onto your skills later on, even if you got off the liveaboard. Again, it's also great to have technical understanding of boats. You don't necessarily have to be a sailor or have prior experience, but this is when the boat specialty becomes real, so you give this in briefings, where the aft is, muster drills are done, safety briefings and things like this. And this is it's best that you're very well versed with this, as well as knowing which parts of the boat, because in dive emergencies, for example, the engineer might try to let you, gives you an orientation of where the fire stuff, if fire equipment is, checking the hull and things, so on and so forth. So it's also great, even as a guest, on a liveaboard, they know that we know, or like crew would know that you have liveaboard experience because you know what to expect and you have a bit of a clue of how things are run on board. So it's an advantage to actually have that. Okay, so the last one, some things to consider, and I've put on others actually. One of the most important things here is your health. Okay, so like I mentioned earlier, you cannot work on board is quite intense. It's not, you're on call 24/7. You sleep, you wake up at 4:30 in the morning, 4:30 in the morning, and then you're asleep at 8 o'clock. It also, requires a lot of discipline, wherein, even for guests that are on board or on a trip, for example, for one whole trip, they end up really tired or knackered at the end of the trip. So much so for the crew, but then, it's really just establishing a system for yourself as a dive professional or somebody who works in the boat, that, you just don't drink every day or so, because drinks are for free, and mostly it is for free. But then you're on call 24/7, so you cannot be, you have to be in top shape. Okay, so other things that you may have to consider is a seaman's book. So seaman's book would require you to do a certification before you get your seaman's book from your home country. You would have to get a certification. It's basically what we call as STCW certificate, which is the Standards of Training Certification, watch keeping of seafarers. And so usually it's a very minimal cost, but it's always something handy to have, especially, and this is universal, like internationally. It's always an advantage to have this passport ready. You may not have to use this for your entire lifetime, but if you're free and may take the course, you'd just be required to do a training on firefighting or so, and that usually lasts like 7 days. But if you get the time and it costs nothing, you can take that before applying on liveaboard jobs, because it's required for work permits or so, especially on liveaboards. And of course, work permits. Most people can get away in resorts not just having a work permit or a work visa at that country, but for liveaboards, it's normally the company that gets that for you. And when they do that, you'd have to be committed to get on board for at least a year, because they're quite pricey. But yeah, you cannot get away without having, not having a work permit, because the harbor master or the Coast Guard would always check you on that. Okay, so that's pretty much the discussion I have for you today. I hope I've been able to encourage you into getting in the liveaboard, establishing a liveaboard career. So these are just a few hundred trips that I've done, and this is the one that's on top is Raja Ampat, where I'm currently assigned in, and as well as Komodo. And I, believe it or not, I hike this area every 10 days, and it's hard work, and most days I really don't like it anymore, but it's still amazing. So I totally recommend you working on liveaboards. It's intense, but it's very, very rewarding. So thank you. Anybody has questions? So 2 guys in the photo are from your hometown, really? Well, most of the guests that we have are British, so B? So there's a question here from Tom. Do you get any day off from time to time, or are you doing really one trip or after another? So it depends on the boat the fleet that you're working with. So, just be prepared. Normally you could have, like, for example, in Tubata season. Okay, in Tubata season, that's actually a very good starter. I started my liveaboard career in Tubataha because it's just it's 12 weeks straight. So you get 24 hours in between trips to do your own thing. Maybe you'd get 8 hours, okay, and that's full time. But it's just a 3-month season, which is easy. Well, I used to think it was really hard, but now it's like easy. It depends. So you get maybe a maximum of 1 day. There are some boats though that they have, it's not all year round that they are booked, so you'd have maybe a week or so, but you'd still be spending that week on the boat, because the captain may ask you to do some maintenance stuff on the boat. But yeah, you'd normally get, like, now at the moment I get 60 days off a year, and my boat is it's fully booked for the whole year, so it runs all year round. Yeah, there have been times where I was not literally, stepped off the boat or on land for about 50 days. That was fine. Wasn't so bad. So do you have any I hope that answered your question. So are there any plans when Indonesia and the Philippines is open for tourism again? I'm not so sure about the Philippines, but for Indonesia, I know that we're slated to be open sometime at earliest January. Okay, so that's when they start receiving, I think, again. Although it's still, we don't know. We don't know really, but they say it's early towards the end of the year. So any recommendations for, yeah, hopefully. Sorry. So do you have other recommendations for courses such as international yacht training? Um, it depends on the country that you're in, what is required when you get your work visa, because there may be countries like, for example, in the Philippines, in Tubataha now, if you are on a, because there's two classifications. So there's MV, which is marine vessel, or a marine yacht. So that's MY and MV. So if you're an MV, you have to be required to get a crowd and crisis management and other certifications depending on the country where you're in. In Indonesia, you don't have to get that, but you have to get a seaman's book, okay, because that is a requirement for you to be in the liveaboard business. So they check on that as well to get you qualified to get your work visa. Yacht training, not necessarily. So it depends on the company. It also depends on, mostly it's on the requirements that the country would give you. Okay. Anybody else? Well, thank you. I hope you learned something.
Thank you so much, Anne. That definitely was enlightening. It's really nice to see how much experience you have on the liveaboards, and you've been able to give us some sound advice. I see a few more chats coming in. Just a couple of thank yous. So thank you very much for sending that, everyone.
I'm just gonna put in my email if you need have your more questions, or you need just general questions about liveaboards, or you're getting on the liveaboard or so need whatever. Just let me know. You can drop me an email. Thanks, guys.
Definitely join Anne on one of her liveaboards. Like she said, she's currently in Indonesia on the Indo Siren. So, guys, before you just leave just yet, we have one more presentation, and this one is from Rachel. Rachel is currently in Singapore, and she's going to talk to you a little bit more about our Oceans Gardens. I'm just going to quickly switch her to her presentation. So just give me 1 second. Alright. This should be up and running now. And if you wouldn't mind, would you mind muting? Thank you very much. So Rach, I'm going to mute myself and hand over the controls to you. So take it away, I'd say. We can't actually hear you, Rach. I don't know if you're talking yet, but we can't hear what you're saying. Yeah, there you go.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, that's
Sorry,
much
guys.
better. Cheers. All right.
Awesome.
Take us out again. Thank you.
Yeah, okay. So I was just thanking everyone for inviting me. Thank you, Bea and Anne and Raf, for your talks. They were super interesting. I just wanted to basically end the session with a little bit of knowledge about the squishy stuff, of course. But I kind of want to discuss like a little bit about what it means to kind of expand your horizons into becoming a marine educator and like a science communicator, because over the years I think I seem to have found myself in that slot, which I really enjoy. So I'm just going to tell you a little bit about my background. So I'm originally from the UK. I've ended up, my life path has brought me here to the Philippines, which I'm super happy about because I love it here. So I originally started off with a love of the ocean from when I was a little kid, and I always wanted to become a marine biologist. And I never really wanted to go down the path of going to university and, you know, getting into debt and all that hard work for a degree. But it actually worked out that I was doing lots of volunteering in my teens, working for seashore centres and doing seashore safaris with kids in the summer holidays and stuff like that. And I ended up realizing that I really enjoyed this, and that I would definitely have to do a degree in marine biology or marine science to kind of open my opportunities for growth, if you like. So I'm so glad I did that. I'm so glad I went to university in the UK, and it really did open my eyes to all of the different paths that you can take as a marine biologist. And it kind of scared me a little bit. I hear this quite often. I was in the same position, that it's like, I want to be a marine biologist, but I don't really know what path I want to go down. I'm not quite sure what it really means. You could be a researcher, you can be in a lab, you can be an academic, you can, you know, go down like the route of a PhD and things like that, or you can become a marine educator. There's so many different avenues to go down that it is a little bit daunting. So I kind of tried a bit of everything. And basically, while I was at university, I also completed my commercial diving qualification. So I went down the scientific diving route, and I fell in love with it. It was awesome. All in the UK. I managed to get some work doing scientific surveys for various charities and different organizations and things, and I really enjoyed that. Then I was able to get a job working as a business manager for a ecotourism business, and this is where I went back to the marine education to the public. And it really did make me realize that the general public really didn't have much of an idea about the incredible marine life that's on their doorstep. And this is where I realized that there is this huge gap in between the science and the research and the general public. So there is definitely more need for marine and science communicators out there. There needs to be somebody in the middle to kind of pass that information on, because all of this incredible science and research is going on, but you know, the general public won't log on to Google Scholar or, you know, read scientific papers and journals. So there has to be this gap bridged, basically. So I organized lots of diving expeditions, and that's when I realized that I really enjoyed working with other divers. And then luckily I was actually able to work within conservation as a project officer for an aquarium for a seagrass conservation project, which was charity funded. It was 3 years, and it was one of the best jobs I've ever had, for sure, because it really opened up lots of different opportunities. I was able to use all of the different skills that I'd learned over the years, and this was my first experience of actually properly teaching divers. So I wasn't an instructor at this point. I was actually teaching certified divers how to do marine surveys on seagrass beds, and it was so much fun. It was so nice to work with other people who were like-minded. They were really eager to learn. They loved the ocean. They want to do something to help. And 2 of the guys were actually the guys in that photo that Anne showed at the start. So that's really cool to see 2 of my volunteers were on her liveaboard. So yeah, I really enjoyed this, but unfortunately, obviously being charity funded, that job had to end at some point. And after that, we went traveling, me and my partner, and we actually stopped off in the Philippines on the way, and that's where I first met Bea. And Bea, of course, convinced me to do my dive master course, and I'm so glad she did, because it really showed me how much I wanted to work with divers even more. And I really enjoyed the teaching element and sharing the marine knowledge that I had with divers to kind of just boost their experience, basically. So then we ended up coming back to the Philippines even after that, and me and my partner became instructors through IDP, which was one of the most enjoyable, slightly stressful times of our lives. Stressful being the exam, but actually it was really fine in the end. And yeah, it really, I never thought I would enjoy being a diving instructor as much as I do, and it's been such an incredible experience being able to not only teach people how to dive, but to teach them how to dive in an eco-friendly way, you know, keeping those fins up, not touching things, and really explaining to people what they're seeing, you know, show them all of the incredible marine life that they might have missed if they were learning to dive with somebody else. So this is kind of giving you an idea of how my journey has ended up being an instructor and a marine educator. So what I wanted to do was basically give you a little snapshot of some of the things that I teach people about, because since this virus has unfortunately closed all the dive shops, I've had to kind of adapt and try and teach people online via webinars. So I just wanted to give you a little snapshot of a couple of the webinars which I do, and hopefully it'll be some nice, easygoing, interesting info for you guys. All right, so one of the webinars which I teach is one which I wrote about coral reefs. This is kind of a more in-depth look at coral reefs. So I teach the PADI Coral Conservation Specialty, which you can actually get a certification for by just doing the theory, which is really cool. So you can do that online. But I was finding that it was quite a, you know, a fairly general overview of coral reefs. So I just wanted to go into a little bit more depth. So this is just some of the slides from that presentation. So here we are, an incredible, biodiverse, colourful coral reef. This is usually what we think of when we think about coral reefs. This was taken at Apo Island here in the Philippines. Beautiful place. Now, corals have been around for a really, really, really long time. So they evolved way back 530 million years ago. And to give you some perspective, the dinosaurs were around 66 million years ago, and humans have only been around from 6 million years ago. So these corals and these reefs have been growing on this planet for way, way, way before the dinosaurs even appeared. And there's around 6,000 species of corals worldwide, and they come in many incredible different forms. So I'm sure you guys recognize some of these forms that you've seen from diving before. And we've got a huge array of different hard corals, creating all of these incredible limestone skeletons in all of these different formations. And also lots of different soft corals as well. So these ones don't have the limestone skeleton. Some of them have little limestone fragments in their tissues for structure, and some of them actually have a special protein, such as the whip corals and the sea fans, which gives them structure, but still they have flexibility. So these, just the sheer diversity of corals is amazing. So corals are partly solar powered, as you might know. Most of the species actually have a symbiotic dinoflagellate algae. Dinoflagellate is basically a fancy word for single-celled. And they have this incredible zooxanthellae algae living in their tissues, and it actually provides them with 80 to 90% of their nutrition through photosynthesis. They absorb the waste products from the coral animal as well. And of course, the coral animals themselves have their stinging tentacles to be able to capture passing plankton. Now, this dinoflagellate algae, the zooxanthellae, awesome word, they actually acquire this from their clone. So for colonies to actually grow, they will clone themselves. So they take a little bit of that zooxanthellae algae from their clone, or from the mother coral in the egg package, if the coral has been settled from spawning activity. But also they can acquire it from their surrounding environment. So from the this is when they can do this in the planktonic larval stage. So corals have a pretty cool defense system. As I just mentioned, they have these incredible stinging tentacles that they use for catching food, but they also use it for defense as well. Now, these stinging cells are basically these microscopic little sacs which have a poisonous harpoon on a spring ready to fire when it touches anything or anything touches it. And these are called nematocysts. So as I said, they're touch triggered, and they can actually use these for stunning prey and for defense. And some animals will actually eat the coral polyps, including the tentacles and the stinging cells, and they'll actually use them for their own defense. So just like this nudibranch in the photo, they actually digest all of the other parts of the animal, and then they sort of make the nematocysts travel up to the serrata on their back and use them for defense themselves, which is a pretty cool feat of evolution. So there's many reefs all around the world. Coral reefs cover about 0.1% of the ocean floor. And but it's not just these tropical warm water reefs that we see and we tend to think of when we think of a coral reef. There's also a huge amount of cold water reefs and deep water reefs around the world that just doesn't really get a lot of attention. So the deep water reefs and the cold water reefs were discovered with the advancement in technology. So they were the most recently discovered reefs. But believe it or not, over half of all known coral species found in the deep, dark waters have been discovered, down in these cold water reefs. So, you know, there's still these big, beautiful, biodiverse reefs, but they're out of the way of sunlight, so they don't have any of this zooxanthellae algae. They rely completely on catching their prey with their stinging tentacles. They thrive in cold temperatures from -1 to 12 degrees. And some of the deepest reefs in the world are 6,000 meters deep, 6 kilometers. Can you believe that? Incredible. And they're super old as well. They're really slow growing. And some of the oldest of the reefs in the world are actually off Hawaii, and they're over 4,000 years old. So pretty amazing stuff. Now, whether it's the shallow water tropical reef or a cold deep water reef, they all have these incredibly complex food webs. So everything relies on each other to be able to survive. And by removing one or a couple of those species, it can completely change those food webs and the ecology of the reef. Now, because of all of this competition and all of these complex ecological associations going on, it's actually created some pretty cool camouflage. And these photos were taken here in the Philippines, and it just shows you that the way that these animals have actually evolved to be able to camouflage so well within their host animal or within their environment. So hopefully you guys might be able to spot a couple. I'll give you the first one. We've got a beautiful orange frogfish in the first photo. Can anyone write in the chat box if they can see any others? Anybody want to take a guess? Pygmy seahorse, yeah, well done, B. Spider crab, yeah, well done, Anne, awesome. That's that beautiful candy crab on the soft coral there in the top right hand corner. Yeah, awesome. That's right. So we've also got a xeno crab on the whip coral. These guys are really, really cool. They like hug onto the whip coral basically. Soft coral shrimp from Anne. Yep, that's right. So this is a xenia coral shrimp down in the bottom right hand corner. I didn't even know these guys existed, but obviously we're always learning. Reading through the ID books, I was like, oh my God, I need to find that. And literally 2 days after reading about it, we found one, which was really cool. Very tricky to take a photo of though, they're very skittish. So there's our beautiful candy crab. And then down in the bottom left, we've got the crinoid shrimp or feather star shrimp, beautiful pygmy seahorse, and of course the xenia coral shrimp as well. So it's really amazing, all the different marine life that you can see on these coral reefs, of course, which is why we all love to dive there. And of course, other than finding incredible creatures on these reefs, the coral reefs actually provide a huge amount of ecosystem services to humans, which is basically benefits to us. So this infographic is a really lovely example of all of the different benefits that coral reefs give to humans. So I really recommend you guys checking out the International Coral Reef Initiative. They've created these really lovely infographics. So have a little look at that when you have a little bit more time. All right. Okay, so next on to our beautiful seagrass meadows. Definitely the secret garden of the ocean. Hopefully the little video clip is playing for you guys. It's a bit jittery here, but it's probably my Wi-Fi. So seagrass is really kind of an overlooked habitat within our oceans. You know, it just looks like the grass that we have on the land, pretty much. And I think a lot of people mistake it for seaweed. It's not a lot is really known about it. In the last few years, I think it's getting a little bit more coverage. But it'd be really nice to just share some information with you guys, just in case you might learn something about our lovely seagrass. Come on, slide. Here we go. So thinking about how ancient our coral reef systems are on the world, also seagrass has been around for a lot longer than a lot of the living things that we have on the planet now. So the seagrasses evolved around 100 million years ago, and again, we've only been around 6 million years ago, and the dinosaurs 66 million years ago. So the seagrass actually started to evolve around the late Cretaceous period. And like I said, a lot of people might mistake it for algae. You know, it's just a plant in the sea. It's probably seaweed, but actually it's very, very different. So it is the only flowering plant that has been able to evolve to live under the sea out of all of the flowering plants that we have on Earth. So flowering plants would include the trees, the terrestrial grasses, any of the other plants that you see on land, which can basically produce flowers and seeds and reproduce in that way. So as you can see the picture on the left, we've got an example of algae. The main body of the algae is called the blade. It has the stalk at the bottom, which is called the stipe, and it holds on to hard substrate with a holdfast. Whereas seagrass, it has roots buried in the sand or in the mud or in the silt. And these roots and the plants are actually all connected with a creeping rhizome. So the plants actually can clone themselves along this rhizome, and they all pass nutrients to each other. But then to be able for the plant to actually colonize other areas, what they do is produce flowers and seeds, and then those seeds get released into the water currents, just like the seeds of the plants on land do, and they let the wind blow the seeds to somewhere new to be able to colonize. So, as I said, it's the only flowering plant that can survive fully submerged in salt water, and they can be intertidal, so they can be exposed at low tide. And in some places where the seawater is really clear, like in the Caribbean, the seagrass can actually grow down at 60 meters. It's crazy. So as long as it has some nice sunlight and some good sediment to grow in, it's pretty happy. It's very, very old. Like I said, it evolved many, many millions of years ago. But actually, even the seagrass that we have that's still alive today is also very old. So it's very slow growing, ancient habitat, just like our coral reefs. And the oldest seagrass meadow in the world is 200,000 years old in Greece. They actually carbon dated the roots and found that it's one of the oldest habitats on the planet, which is really cool. It's very more closely related to terrestrial lilies and gingers than terrestrial grass. And there's a huge amount of different shapes and sizes to be found, but they create these incredible underwater meadows. So if you think of a beautiful grassy meadow that you see on the land, it's just you know, absorbing all that sunlight, releasing all the oxygen into the atmosphere, and it has a huge plethora of different species living in it. It's basically the underwater version of that. And it really does create a habitat for some incredible species. You just have to swim nice and slowly over the seagrass and just search through all the plants, and you will see some pretty cool stuff. So all of these photos we've taken from seagrass beds. The seahorse was from the UK, from where I'm from. We actually found this seahorse on one of our seagrass surveys, and it was the first seahorse that's been seen for years in the UK, which is really cool. So they are there, but you just got to find them. Different species of nudibranchs, sea cucumbers, beautiful pipe horses, bobtail squid, lots of juvenile fish, especially commercial fish species. You see lots of juveniles of those. And of course, dugongs. I took this photo in the Red Sea. This is Dyson the dugong, hoovering up the seagrass. She was awesome. She actually had a baby last year, which was quite exciting. So yeah, just the plethora of different animals that you can see just within the seagrass habitats is pretty amazing. So there's around 60 species found around the world, and we have 19 species of seagrass here in the Philippines, and that is second in the world to Australia, which has around 30 species. And just in the Philippines alone, we have over 27,000 square kilometers of seagrass meadows. Unfortunately, the seagrass is always under threat in many places around the world, from coastal development, pollution and such. But luckily, there are lots of different organizations around the world which are trying to boost the awareness to people about seagrass and its importance, because we do want to save our seagrass. And one of the most recent things which scientists have found is that seagrass is actually really important for helping fight global warming and climate change. So you guys might have heard about carbon sequestration, or storing carbon and bringing CO2 out of the atmosphere. We want to try and cool down the planet. Seagrass actually does this. It takes CO2 out of the atmosphere, it stores the carbon within its tissues, and then releases the oxygen back into the atmosphere. It does this 35 times more efficiently than rainforest per square meter. That's pretty amazing. So I'm definitely all for saving the rainforest, because obviously it's really, really important for this as well. But I think more people need to realize that seagrass is also extremely important for this reason. So even though it only covers 0.1% of the seafloor, it's actually responsible for 11% of all of the carbon storage that is stored by the ocean, which is what we call blue carbon. So things like mangrove forests do this as well. They actually are responsible for 14% of the blue carbon storage on our planet. Things like seaweeds, and also, of course, the phytoplankton. So it's really, really important, especially at the moment. And there's a lot of information about this actually in David Attenborough's new documentary on Netflix, and also Kiss the Ground is another really good documentary on Netflix, which I recommend watching. It's kind of wraps your head around this whole carbon sequestration subject as well. There we go. All right, guys. So just that's a little snapshot of some of the things that I teach my students about. So like I said, I find it extremely rewarding not only to teach people how to dive, and of course I learned from the best. IDP run a rigorous IDC, that's for sure, and you definitely learn a huge amount from B and the whole team, of course. And it's really nice to be able to add your own knowledge into like the generic way to teach people to dive. So I'm always hearing from my students how nice it was to learn how to dive from a marine biologist, because you get all that extra stuff, all that extra knowledge. So I highly recommend getting in touch with RAF as well. The work that IMR do is absolutely incredible. So they'll be able to teach you a huge amount of how to do science within your diving as well, which is definitely what we need. We need more conservationists, we need more science communicators and educators, and definitely more researchers as well. So if you guys are interested in taking part in any of my webinars, I can do one-to-one or with groups, or if you'd like to earn a PADI specialty certification while you're waiting to go diving in the real world, if you're stuck in lockdown still, just get in touch. It'd be really nice to speak to you guys. Or if you want any information about how to try to get into the whole marine educator, science communicator world, then please let me know. It'd be nice to chat to you guys. Thank you so much. Have you got any questions?
Thank you so much, Rach. I see Anne has a question for you in the chat box.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. How long does it take for the seagrass to die when the tide is low for too long? Well, actually, the species of seagrass that grows in the intertidal zone, it is able to live there because it can handle it. So some species of seagrass doesn't get on so well in the intertidal zones, some of the smaller, more delicate species. So it's usually the slightly more robust species that tend to be able to survive okay when it's low tide. So obviously the tide comes back in twice a day, so it can get back under the water. But obviously seagrass is very similar to terrestrial grasses in that it can be quite seasonal. So for example, in the UK, it does tend to die back around this time of year because it's autumn there. So you see over the time of autumn and winter, just like the terrestrial plants that we have on land, they start to lose their leaves. They kind of go a little bit smaller. They go into like hibernation mode almost. And then in spring, they just come back to life and get really long and healthy and thick again. So.
Thank you so much, Rach. That was a really good presentation. And like she said, she's teaching these specialties online as well, about coral reef conservation, for example. So you can earn the entire specialty just while you're online with her. She also has some amazing webinars, like she said. So definitely worth reaching out to her. Rach, would you be so kind to leave your email address in the notes, please? Yeah, I see it here as well on the screen, but then it's easy to copy paste when it's in the chat box. And Rachel's actually currently also very busy in Siki Horror, so if you ever have the opportunity to go out and visit her, then you should definitely look her up and go for a couple dives with Rachel, or take some of these specialty certifications with her. It really is a lot more than just a course standard. So very, very cool. All right, guys. So if anyone has any other questions, please feel free to add that to the chat box. But otherwise, I actually really enjoyed having all of you here, and I really enjoyed listening to Raphael and Anne and Rachel. So thank you so much, guys, for doing this, and I really hope that you guys will have a very busy dive career next year, as this year is obviously a little bit of a bust. But we keep going, and it's inspiring to see that you're still keeping yourselves occupied with everything involved in diving. So thank you everyone for joining. If you're interested in taking any further courses to become a dive professional, you can reach out to us as well. You can visit us on www.instructordevelopmentphilippines.com, or you can email us at info@instructordevelopmentphilippines.com, and we will get back to you with more information. So I wish you all a pleasant afternoon or evening or night, depending on where you are in the world, and we hope to see you again soon. All right, cheers everyone.
Thanks, B. Bye.
Bye.